American life can be separated into two camps, Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street. For me, it's two words, Big and Bird. What character in Mr. Rogers' universe could possibly compete with Big Bird? Also, did Mr. Rogers ever have any catchy songs with legitimately good funk music and totally psychedelic animation that makes counting to 12 feel like you're at a Sly and the Family Stone concert? No, he sang boring songs with puppets whose mouths didn't even move. Plus, if I'm being honest, the way he spoke, it was a little creepy for me as a kid. There, I said it. I'm sorry. But, and I feel like I'm not alone in this, as an adult, I've completely changed camps to Mr. Rogers. I watched the recent documentary Won't You Be My Neighbor about his life and career at Nighthawk Cinema with my dad and was offered an ultimatum numerous times. Cry publicly or crap my pants trying not to. By now you've heard the following quote. It's been memified and butchered 1,000 times, but I think it sums up humanity's best quality.
My mother used to say, whenever there would be any really catastrophe, always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers, because if you look for the helpers, you'll know that there's hope.
Part 1 of this Fugue series on fate and biology was about the brain cocktail that takes the reins during a conflict and makes physical violence basically inevitable. The star of Part 2, today's episode, is a brain chemical that compels inevitable behaviors based on feelings of bonding. Most of us are motivated by a yearning to feel connection with other people. Sometimes we do good things in service of this, and sometimes not so good. So let's start with the happy stuff, helping strangers. And if this is your first episode, when I refer to a fugue, it's really the story of a moment. And one thing I do in this podcast is a post-fugue analysis. My co-host and I deconstruct what was happening in my brain and mind during the fugue. His very deep voice pipes in from time to time during other parts of the episode too, so that's who that is. So now that you know, let's get to the first fugue of this episode, which is called How Jesus Opens a Bag of Chips. During an otherwise forgettable day in early 2019, I was headed south on the G train towards Brooklyn Heights. Like most frequent subway riders, anything happening around you becomes either live reality TV or nothing. You just ignore it. Teenagers doing stripper moves on subway poles, a white guy with dreads singing No Woman, No Cry, but the Mumford & Sons version, someone eating half a chicken, chucking chicken bones on the floor, or some asshole clipping their fingernails. I try to spend most of my subway time in the ignore camp. Smartphones make it easy to create a protective bubble around yourself, so I was reading something while music was playing full blast in my ears. A few seats away, an older woman snapped me out of my phone fugue. She had a bunch of Whole Foods grocery bags at her feet and a bag of bougie potato chips in her hands, but she was struggling to open them. So I watched her make a few attempts without success, and I weighed intervening. I enjoy a good deed, but I wondered if it would be socially awkward to approach a stranger on the subway with an unclear gesture. Then I realized, who's going to object to a random act of kindness? Plus, there was something about her struggle that made it look like a cry for help. So I gave up my seat, walked towards her, and asked if I could offer some assistance. And she looked up at me, smiling, and immediately handed them over without hesitation. I figured this would take a second at best, but the bag was made of some kind of flexible iron, and my face was turning reddish-purple, pulling at the seam with just about all of my physical strength. I still had confidence I could do it with brute force, but worried that if I succeeded, the chips would explode all over both of us. Plus, there was the added pressure of an audience of onlookers now, so I had to get this right. So I paused the strongman strategy, examined the top of the bag, and found that tiny little seam clearly indicating where to tear. And then, like magic, I opened them without effort and handed them back to her. There was a look of genuine appreciation in her eyes, and she immediately dug into the chips and offered me some. As she did, the fluorescent lights in the subway car dimmed, and a warm, sharply contoured golden light emanated from my chest and encircled my entire body. And then that light connected to her chest and encircled her body, and we both levitated, her still eating her potato chips, until our heads tapped the steel ceiling of the subway car, and as our hands reached out to each other, I told her, "No thank you, ma'am. Please, enjoy your chips. I love you." And as I looked upon my fellow riders, they erupted in thunderous applause. Then I floated back to my seat, wondering if this was how Jesus felt when he opened a bag of potato chips for the less fortunate. Hello and welcome to this episode's first post-fugue analysis. I'm your host, Gabriel Berezin.
And I'm Gabe's inner voice, but with less hubris.
What's that supposed to mean?
For the last time, you're not Jesus Christ.
So, we talked about some of the brain's mood chemicals in part 1. Is the same stuff at play during my chip bag opening holy moment?
Not quite. The joy you experienced came from oxytocin.
The super addictive pain medication?
No, the super addictive bonding chemical. You're thinking of OxyContin.
Right, oxytocin.
Yeah, this is the mood chemical released during any kind of bonding.
So it's active for people in love, or making love.
Stop it.
Making whoopee.
I'm ignoring you now. It's not oxytocin alone on the rocks. Depending on the context, it's a specific cocktail.
Oh, what else is in it?
For your fugue just now, it's oxytocin for bonding and dopamine for reward. Can't beat that drink.
Garçon, one please. Oh, and make that 2 for me and my imaginary friend.
Oh my god, stop.
I've read that oxytocin is released during childbirth and breastfeeding too. Is that true?
Yep, first and strongest bond of your life.
So why did I get an oxytocin rush? I opened a bag of chips. I didn't breastfeed the lady.
I see the same image as you do when you say that stuff, right?
Sorry.
Oxytocin isn't just released during contact between a mother and child or between
lovers?
It can come out just from reading a text from a loved one.
So it's another kind of high, courtesy of your natural brain chemicals.
Yeah, it's one of the best highs you can get, and it reinforces what the PhDs call prosocial behavior.
Fancy. What's that mean?
It means behaving cooperatively, selflessly.
What else?
It also means volunteering, sharing resources.
So we really are driven to help people.
Yeah, well, you seem to enjoy it, you little kumbaya motherfucker.
Yeah, but I figure that's probably pretty common.
I get why people chase it. It's a long-lasting, warm glow.
Kinda nice to know that good deeds can be as inevitable as the bad ones.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of philosophers and scientists have speculated that it's actually selfish in a way because you're really just chasing that high you experienced.
Now, come on, don't ruin this for me. I mean, if that's selfish.
Yeah, you could do a lot worse.
So helping that woman created a bond.
You temporarily made a team of 2.
And that's where the oxytocin rush came from.
Yep.
I wonder how she's doing right now.
I hate to burst your bubble, but it's not all, won't you be my neighbor with this cocktail?
Wait, did you just sing?
Go tell your next fugue.
Stick around for fugue number 2 coming up after the break.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you not?
Howdy, neighbor. Usually Inner Voice does these little reminders, but he's kind of a dick. We're hoping to grow our audience for fugues, and the best way to do that is to run up the ratings and comments on iTunes. If you're still listening and enjoying this episode and felt compelled to help, there's a link in the show notes that should make it pretty easy to rate and comment. Hopefully there's a nice little oxytocin rush in there for you. Do you know why the city of Philadelphia greased their light posts with Crisco before their football team played in the 2018 Super Bowl?
More sports.
Just like part 1, no one needs any prior sports knowledge.
Is this a sports podcast now?
Go away. They didn't know if the Eagles would beat the New England Patriots, but they did know one thing for sure. That if they did win, people would drink a ton and set things on fire. Get a bunch of people together at night, all loving each other, celebrating the same thing, high on dopamine, oxytocin, and booze. Someone has to attempt scaling a light post, putting their own life and other lives in danger, because we seem to inevitably revel in destruction while we celebrate things. So this episode's second fugue speaks to the dark side of the bond. This one's called Revenge of the Minutemen. When I was 15 years old, I was playing in a Massachusetts League soccer game. It was the snobby Lexington kids versus South Boston, and we were on their turf. For most of the game, my heart just wasn't really in it. Every so often when I was a kid, I was haunted by a bit of nihilism during sports, which was obviously my inner voice's fault.
What is the point of all this? Who cares if I kick this stupid ball?
Then somebody booted the ball way behind their defense, and an opportunity for a goal presented itself. So I snapped out of my nothing else matters fugue, and across 20 yards of green-brown grass, I started sprinting towards that ball. But so did their remaining defender from the exact opposite direction. Funny thing when you're 15, running not only doesn't hurt, it feels good. So we were really hauling ass at each other. And it would be a photo finish on who got there first, and by a hair I won, taking a desperation shot at the goal. I didn't see if I was close to scoring because just as I kicked the ball, the Southie kid kicked my ankle and broke it in 2 places instantly. There was so much pain I don't actually remember it, but I rolled around, grasping my leg and screaming every swear I could think of, while the Southie player, along with 2 of his teammates, stood over me and laughed. That bit of taunting didn't go over so well with the guys on my team. I was carried to the sidelines, toughing it out, had the obligatory line of high fives as my team huddled around me for a minute, and then the game went on. Then I noticed a few of the scrappier guys on my team sitting cross-legged in a circle, shin pads and cleats on, pointing a finger at and noting the jersey number of the Southie player who just broke my leg, and they built a revenge plan in the grass. A few minutes later, I watched one of my guys chase that Southie kid down and blatantly take him out, and everybody went batshit crazy like the little Lord of the Flies massholes we were, and I laced my fingers behind my head as a warm, pain-killing glow of Lexington pride washed over me. Welcome back to the post-fugue analysis of this episode's second fugue, Revenge of the Minuteman. I'm your host, Gabriel Berezin.
And I'm Gabe's disembodied inner voice.
There's some big mental phenomena at play here, but what's your hot take, inner voicey?
Well, Inigo Montoya, I see you enjoy revenge lust as much as the next guy.
It wasn't my revenge. I didn't take the guy out.
No, but you cheered.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm not judging you. I cheered too.
Those Southie guys didn't exactly have remorse for what happened.
No, didn't seem that way. It got me thinking back to your first fugue.
Oh, my potato chips come to Jesus story?
Yeah, that feeling you had with that lady, that rainbow connection that raised you off the ground, or however you described it.
Oxytocin again, right?
Yep, same chemical. But this time oxytocin created a bigger invisible bond between you and all the members of your soccer team.
More of a chain link between us all.
Okay, sure.
So that same love chemical binds whole teams together, too.
Yeah, the academics call this in-group, out-group.
Which sounds like a fancy way of saying teams.
Pretty much. It's any group of people bonded by an idea, a geography, a belief, or a mission of some kind.
Well, thanks for making it less about sports balls.
In lab settings, just a nasal spray of oxytocin will make people more trusting and cooperative with in-group members. This tends to...
No.
What?
Actually, that study's been debunked. They couldn't replicate the findings.
Really?
Yeah, look it up.
Well, fuck me. That's kind of messing with my confidence.
Well, now you know how I feel all the time.
Wow, I kind of get it now.
Good. Maybe you'll go easier on me now.
I doubt it.
Yeah, me too.
So, back to in-group, out-group.
I was just reminded of football teams huddled in a circle, chanting and shouting before a game, or baseball players doing long, choreographed high-five rituals.
And don't forget the pre-battle rally speeches.
Yeah, like the famous one in Braveheart.
And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Or Al Pacino's speech in Any Given Sunday.
Now, I think you're gonna see a guy who will go that inch with you. Hell yeah. You're gonna see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're gonna do the same for him. Hell yeah. That's a team, gentlemen. Hell yeah. And either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals.
Or the rallying cry of Bill Pullman as President of the United States in Independence Day.
We will be united in our common interest. Perhaps it's fate that today is the 4th of July, and you will once again be fighting for our freedom. Not from tyranny, oppression, or persecution, but from annihilation. We're fighting for our right to live, to exist. And should we win the day, the 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
The fictional players and soldiers in those movies and the viewers of those movies are all flooded with oxytocin.
Making them high off the idea of us.
Versus them.
Right, can't have an us without them.
Nope. That invisible chain that links a team is everyone's shared experience of that oxytocin bonding high.
So that team bond is what compelled my guys to build a revenge plan.
Yeah, even if your teammates didn't particularly like you.
They like me.
Debatable. But even if they didn't, retaliation was basically a foregone conclusion, especially given the severity of your injury.
So it's like that bonding high increases the likelihood of that bloodlust high in part 1. Link to part 1 in the show notes.
Yeah, that high makes it far more likely to root for, carry out, and celebrate bodily harm to other people.
It's almost like it stamps out your own morality.
For anyone outside your team, yeah. You can't quite tell you're doing something wrong because it feels so good doing it.
And most sports fans root for retaliation.
Yeah, it's a twisted form of justice.
Entertaining justice.
For you it is.
It totally is. We'll be right back to talk about why we can't help but identify enemies.
Hey, Gabe's inner voice here again. Anyone looking for a co-host on a different podcast?
Excuse me?
Nothing. Got any podcast-loving friends looking for a weird new show that's not about murder? Send them a link to Fugues. Let them know what you think. Thanks for listening, and hit me up at fuguespod@gmail.com if you're looking for a guest host. Get me out of here. Okay, bye for now.
Welcome back to the Fugues post-game. I'm your host, Gabriel Berezin.
And I'm your co-host, the guy that thinks sports are stupid and pointless.
Yeah, sports are dumb.
Oh, shut up. You love sports.
Oh, don't hate the player.
Yeah, hate the jerseys.
I don't think that's how the saying goes.
No, but the jerseys make the us versus them divisions impossible to ignore.
We just can't help throwing feces at each other, can we?
In their book, The Power of Us, PhDs Jay Van Bavel and Dominic Packer spent some time exploring why paying close attention to the differences between your group and another group is a survival instinct.
You don't want to be in the wrong gang, is that it?
Right, you could get ejected.
Is that such a big deal, though?
For a human, it is. We don't do well by ourselves. Our survival rate plummets without a group.
And you gotta make sure you're in the right one.
Yeah, if you get caught in a competing group, they might kill you before a predator or starvation does.
So, Jay and Dominic are saying it's an evolutionary advantage to make distinctions between us and them.
Yeah, it's buried in our survival instincts.
You know, at this point in our history, where everybody's connected by technology, shouldn't being a human be the universal team we all identify with?
Oh God, it really is kumbaya and drum circles with you. Should we all hold hands now?
Maybe.
Look, it's a nice thought, but we just love a common enemy too much.
Well, let's make one up then.
It's not like you're the first to think of that. The most recent version of The Watchmen on HBO uses this plot point. You also called out Independence Day for the most obvious example.
I don't care what you say, I still love Independence Day.
Oh yeah? What about the sequel?
There's a sequel?
Oh, you don't remember? Will Smith wouldn't sign on because I assume the script was
Okay,
trash.
shush now. That's unimportant. But the original is so rewatchable. All the nations and races rallying together to fight ugly, totally irredeemable aliens.
Yeah, that's why it's the #1 Sunday afternoon hangover movie. It's so satisfying to watch humanity finally align and beat the slimy, very easy to identify bad guys.
Exactly. So, wait, what's your beef with sports then?
Because it's against other humans. Anything that emulates battle reinforces the idea that it's good to fight.
All right.
And everyone has to wear uniforms.
Geez, what is it with you and uniforms?
The second you put your team's jersey on, you're an enemy to the visiting team. And we teach this at a very young age, which makes an already very divisive race even more so.
So we teach sportsmanship too.
Oh yeah? How's that going?
I don't know.
Okay, why don't you Google "parents freak out over Little League games" and see what comes up.
You really are a buzzkill today.
Truth hurts, man.
We'll be right back to talk about where storytelling fits into all this.
Hey listeners, Gabe's inner voice here. He's letting me out of my cage a lot for this episode. Had to call out this great sketch by British comedy duo Mitchell and Webb about Nazis, wondering if maybe they're the bad guys. Check it out in the show notes.
Welcome back to the Post-Fugues analysis. Me and Inner Voice have one more thing to discuss. Why are group identities so strong?
Well, we have to look back at the evolutionary advantage that allowed Homo sapiens to wipe out the...
You mean us?
Yeah, us. That allowed us to wipe the other human species off the face of the planet 50,000-ish years ago.
Like Neanderthals?
Yeah, Neanderthals had no shot of coexisting with us.
What was the evolutionary advantage? More aggression?
Neanderthals were aggressive too, and physically stronger than us.
So what's the difference then?
Power in numbers, for one. Homo sapiens formed much bigger groups than their competitors.
Oh, because we were smarter?
Sort of. In his book, Sapiens, Yuval Harari shares how we build much larger group identities because of one simple cognitive shift.
Well...
Fictions.
Fictions? Really?
Yeah.
That feels like a stretch.
It shouldn't. All we do is make up stories. Think of it this way. Homo sapiens refer to things that don't exist in the physical world all the time.
Okay, yeah.
Like anything we can't see, can't touch, taste, smell, or hear.
So we made bigger group identities by imagining things?
Tens of thousands of years ago, most Neanderthals were more likely to say, "Hey Thog, deer over there, let's chase it and eat it."
Okay.
But Homo sapiens imagined fictions. They may chase that same deer, but early sapiens were telling stories about it, to themselves and to each other. If they did catch it and kill it, they would thank the deer's spirit for sacrificing its life, or thank one of their gods for giving them the gift of sustenance, depending on their cultural beliefs.
So were they aware they were just telling stories?
No, those stories are their reality. They accepted those stories as fact.
This is us now as much as it was then, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so.
So we believe these stories collectively.
Yeah, it's our shared reality which creates our shared identity.
Okay, so if we all believe in the same deer spirit, or teams, or gods, we're bonded by a superficial identity, like, oh, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian too, we're the same.
Yeah, you're a Manchester United fan? So am I. Let me buy you a drink.
So that shared identity means that by default, we're not adversaries.
Right, you're not competing. And that means that Homo sapiens could form groups of hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, all in the same in-group. Neanderthals couldn't do that.
Why not?
Because they didn't have a catchy narrative to unite the smaller factions. It seems their brains just weren't built that way.
So is this just religion and sports?
No, dummy. Homo sapiens can make up any fiction and form group identities around it, like towns, cities, states, companies, currencies.
Oh, okay, like whole nations. Like the United States of America is just a great big group identity.
Exactly. They're all made up. We basically imagined these things into reality.
Okay, so what's this got to do with my childhood soccer team?
Neanderthals had a simple group identity. They were part of a traveling band of about 100 or so people finding shelter and food sources.
So that was pretty rooted in the physical world around them.
Yes, but the Homo sapiens on your Lexington soccer team and the Homo sapiens on the South Boston soccer team have totally made-up group identities.
And those identities bonded each team like a band of brothers.
Playing a made-up sport that basically emulates war.
So this tendency to believe in myths
creates made-up divisions like regional soccer teams, which reinforce group identity.
Bonded by the brain chemical oxytocin.
Yep, all while following the tradition of wearing decorated sports jerseys.
That make it easy to identify the other team.
And a story that says, My town is better than your town, and you just injured a player of ours.
Which makes revenge, in the narrative of each Lexington soccer team member's mind, both justified
And inevitable.
When I first learned about oxytocin, I couldn't imagine a dark side to it. It's just love and loyalty. When I held my nephew Brady for the first time, about a week after he was born, I remember thinking, whoa, I would literally take a bullet for this kid. And despite the fact that he's a teenager now, I still feel that way. A bullet to the leg, maybe. But when it comes to teams, there always has to be an other. Our small differences in group identities have inevitably led to violence throughout history. And not only that, we love celebrating the bloodshed. Another great little excerpt in the book Sapiens, Yuval Harari talks about the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where 16th century French Catholics attacked French Protestants whose group identities differed on slight variations of how they interpreted Christ's love. In 24 hours, upwards of 10,000 Protestants were killed in the name of this difference. The Pope over in Italy was so happy with this outcome that he commissioned new panels depicting this historical slaughter in a special room of the Vatican. Being the storytellers our brains are, we have to have an us and a them, which usually boils down to the good guys and the bad guys, which determines who we help and who we destroy. That old trope is not doing us any favors. I don't pretend to have a solution for any of this, but I will say there is one thing that gives me hope. New York City beaches. During a humid summer Saturday, most New Yorkers have a simple commonality. We feel sweaty and gross, and we want to be by an ocean. On any New York City beach, you've got every type of person there. Every race, every body type, every age, every gender. People covered in tats and piercings, Hasidic Jews, huge families in literal tents, interracial couples, gay couples, the solo hipster, the topless women, the crying children. And somehow, we're all fine. In fact, while I was at Rockaway Beach last summer, an 8-year-old boy was separated from his mother, and a lifeguard was ushering him around the surf to find her. The kid was trying to keep it together, but he was clearly distressed. People were lining up to help, and the helpers drew no lines in the sand around superficial distinctions.
Remove play on words.
Too late. It was as if we were all kids, imagining being separated from our mothers, just humans having empathy for another human. So, when you're worried about the divisions of humanity, book a trip to New York and go to the beach. And maybe dream up evil aliens attacking the beachgoers so we can have a common enemy. In large groups or in small groups, it's hard for individual humans to resist their own brain programming, and it can make many outcomes seem unavoidable. But it doesn't have to be this way. That's why in part 3, the final part of this series, I'll be joined by Joe Smorrow. Joe's a police officer featured in the 2019 HBO documentary Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. The documentary follows Joe on the job helping people in mental and emotional distress and training first responders to de-escalate conflict so that bad things don't happen to people that are often in the midst of the most harrowing moments of their lives. Joe is disrupting those so-called inevitable outcomes during police interactions. Thanks for listening to part 2 of this series on fate and biology. Some quick things to share that you can find in the show notes. There's a link to part 1 of this series about the brain's Molotov cocktail, and a link to the iTunes version of this episode where you can help by leaving a rating or comment, sharing your inner voice's thoughts on this podcast. Hopefully yours is nicer than mine. Oxytocin is pretty well studied in the context of friendship, motherhood, love, team bonding, so there's some research there if you want to dig deeper. There are also links to Sapiens, which is on just about everyone's top 10 must-read lists, and The Power of Us by Jay Van Bavel and Dominic Packer, which as I record this is not actually out yet, but you can pre-order it now. It really feels like essential reading these days. I can't recommend it enough. There's also a link to a podcast episode I produced for the Neuroleadership Institute about a chance meeting between my brother Josh and an Uber driver named Kendrick that shows what it's like to lend a helping hand to a stranger and how that gesture can have a butterfly effect. Oh, and definitely check the Mitchell and Webb sketch on Nazis that my pal Inner Voicey mentioned. Fugues is written and produced by me, Gabriel Berezin. The brilliant music and sound design you hear comes courtesy of Grant Zubritsky and Kirk Shanehair. The patient and insightful editing comes from Monty Montan, and the Fugue's logo design is by her brother, Justin Montan. And I'm still waiting for Jessica Montan to create Fugue's branded mugs. Part 3 of this series is up next. Until then, see you in the next Fugue.